Imagine waking up one day and seeing a stranger in the mirror. Not a physical stranger, the contours of your face remain familiar, but a haunting presence behind the eyes, a version of yourself you've never met. This is not a hallucination. It's more subtle, more insidious, the creeping realization that the life you're living belongs to someone else. A borrowed script. A performance perfected over decades, applauded by society, yet hollow enough to echo. You try to shake the feeling, but it clings like smoke. Who are you, really, when the applause fades? Contemplate this: you are both the sculptor and the marble. Every choice you've made, career, relationships, beliefs, has chiseled away at the raw material of your psyche. But what if the hands holding the chisel aren't yours? What if the face emerging from the stone isn't yours either, but a mosaic of expectations, inherited traumas, and cultural hypnosis? Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask that crushes the skull it was meant to protect. The more polished the mask, the tighter its grip. You've become a collaborator in your own erasure. Here lies the paradox: the self you've constructed to survive the world has become the very obstacle to your awakening. You yearn for authenticity, yet cling to routines, labels, and ideologies that keep you fragmented. You chase success, yet court a quiet despair that whispers, "Is this all?" Society rewards your compliance, promotions, accolades, the illusion of stability, but demands a forfeit. The price? Your unlived lives. The artist you buried at 19. The lover you silenced for duty. The rebel you drowned in practicality. These ghosts don't haunt, they wait. Why do we fear our depths while clinging to shallow waters? Jung's answer is unnerving: we are terrified of our own luminosity. To confront the shadow, the reservoir of denied desires, latent genius, and primal instincts, is to risk annihilation. Better to kneel at the altar of the familiar, even if it slowly starves the soul. But the soul does not die, it festers. It surfaces as inexplicable rage, midnight dread, or the gnawing sense that you're living a delayed life. You mistake this unrest for failure, when in truth, it's a summons. Consider the oak tree. An acorn contains not just the blueprint for its growth, but an imperative: become what you are. No oak agonizes over being a birch. Yet humans spend lifetimes contorting themselves into shapes that violate their inner architecture. Nietzsche's warning, "Become who you are," is not encouragement but an ultimatum. Your potential is not a utopian fantasy, it's a lived reality waiting to be claimed. But how? The path is neither linear nor safe. It demands a descent into the labyrinth of the unconscious, where minotaurs of memory and illusion guard the center. You've been taught to seek answers out there, in productivity hacks, viral manifestos, the dopamine hit of self-optimization. Yet the louder the world shouts, the more deafening your inner silence becomes. This is no accident. A society obsessed with speed, visibility, and consumption thrives on your disorientation. What if your restlessness is not a flaw to medicate, but a compass? Jungian psychology whispers, your symptoms are your allies. That anxiety? A protest against inauthenticity. That numbness? A strike against soul-deadening labor. But here's the trap: you cannot think your way into wholeness. The mind, brilliant as it is a master of evasion. It rationalizes, justifies, and spins narratives to keep you stranded in the shallows. Meanwhile, the unconscious, the 90% of your psyche hidden beneath awareness, operates in symbols, dreams, and primal urges. It speaks the language of myth, not spreadsheets. To ignore it is to wage civil war within yourself. Jung's patients didn't suffer from a lack of reason, they suffered from a lack of myth, a failure to reconcile the modern self with ancient, archetypal forces. So let me ask you, what gods have you unwittingly worshipped? The god of productivity? The god of others' approval? The god of numbness? These secular deities demand your vitality as tribute, leading you a husk draped in achievements. Yet beneath this desecration, your primal self persists, the daimon the Greeks believed guided each soul to its destiny. It does not care about your resume. It cares only for your yes to the summons, your courage to meet yourself in the dark. The great question is not what should I do with my life, but who dares to live through me. Your potential is not a future trophy but a present fire. To realize it means surrendering the persona's illusion of control, not to chaos, but to the deeper intelligence Jung called the self. This is not a destination. It is a daily crucifixion of the false and resurrection of the true. You will not find this path on a vision board. It begins when you turn away from the crowd and face the abyss, and discover, in its depths, the reflection you've always feared and needed. The mask is cracking. Will you peel it off, or let it suffocate you? You stand at the edge of a forest you've been told does not exist. Society insists the trees are mere illusions, your hunger for meaning, a childish fantasy. But the roots beneath your feet tell a different story. They snake through the bedrock of history, feeding on the unspoken pact between civilization and the human soul. To belong, you must sever parts of yourself and call the mutilation maturity. Why does this self-betrayal feel so inevitable? The answer lies in what Jung termed the collective shadow, the psychic inheritance of centuries of repressed instincts, forbidden questions, and exiled truths. Every culture builds its identity on a mass grave of disowned selves. The good citizen is forged in the burial of primal wildness, the rational mind rises from the ashes of banished mystery. You are not just fighting your own conditioning, but the unresolved ghosts of your ancestors. Nietzsche saw this clearly. Morality is the herd instinct in the individual. What we call normal is often collective trauma wearing a crown. Consider the myth of Prometheus. For stealing fire, the divine spark of consciousness, he was chained to a rock, his liver devoured daily by an eagle. The modern parallel is subtler. We are punished by the fire, not for stealing it. The very light that could guide us to self-realization, our creativity, individuality, hunger for the sacred, is pathologized as arrogance, instability, or madness. The system thrives on your fragmentation. A whole human, awake to their power, is a threat to every hierarchy built on borrowed authority. This is not conspiracy but consequence. From childhood, you were initiated into a sacred inversion, external validation over internal truth. Grades measured your compliance, not curiosity. Careers rewarded your predictability, not passion. Even spirituality became another marketplace, offering prepackaged enlightenment to those who kneel at the altar of quick fixes. Huxley's Brave New World was not a dystopian fantasy but a manual. A really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced, because they love their servitude. Your complicity is not weakness, it's survival. The persona, your social mask, and the shadow, your disowned self, form a psychological immune system. They protect you from exile, but at a Faustian cost. Jung observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. You scroll instead of meditate. You argue politics instead of confront your voids. You cling to toxic relationships because the certainty of pain feels safer than the terror of the unknown. Beneath this dances a darker truth: your fear of freedom is older than you. Schopenhauer argued that most humans prefer the misery of predictability to the agony of possibility. It's not that you don't want truth, you want truth without upheaval. But genuine growth demands annihilation. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly, it dissolves into primordial soup, its very essence rewritten. No wonder you cling to your cocoon of habits. As Kafka warned, you can hold yourself back from the sufferings of the world, but perhaps this very holding back is the one suffering you could avoid. The modern world weaponizes this paradox. Consumer capitalism thrives on manufactured inadequacy, convincing you that wholeness lies in the next purchase, promotion, or partner. Social media algorithms exploit your deepest vulnerabilities, turning your hunger for belonging into an addiction to performance. Even the wellness industry peddles self-care as another form of self-surveillance, reducing your psyche to a machine to be optimized. The result? A global epidemic of spiritual bypassing, using enlightenment as a shield against the messy work of true self-confrontation. Yet the roots dig deeper than economics. Existential philosophers like Sartre recognize that humans are condemned to freedom. With no divine script, we face the unbearable weight of authorship. It's easier to wear chains than bear the vertigo of infinite choice. This is the essence of bad faith, surrendering your agency to roles, labels, and systems that let you plead, "I had no choice." But Viktor Frankl, surviving Auschwitz, discovered the crack in this lie: between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. The tragedy? Most never find that space, having filled it with noise, distraction, and the cowardice of certainty. Jungian psychology reveals the ultimate bind: individuation. The process of becoming whole requires facing what you've been taught to despise. Your rage is not toxic, it's a demand for boundaries. Your sadness is not weakness, it's the psyche's irrigation. Your shadow isn't a monster under the bed, it's the exiled prophet who remembers your name. But culture pathologizes depth. The mystic becomes the heretic. The visionary becomes the madman. The lover becomes the fool. Rilke wrote, "Perhaps everything terrible is, in its deepest being, something helpless that wants help from us." Your demons are diplomats from the underworld, negotiating your liberation. Yet resistance comes from within. The ego, your sense of I, is a brilliant saboteur. It distracts you with midlife crises, burnout, and existential fatigue rather than let you glimpse the truth. You are not the voice in your head, but the awareness hearing it. You are not your failures, but the consciousness that transcends them. This is why meditation feels like death to the ego. It threatens the illusion of control. As Alan Watts noted, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The hidden problem is not that you're broken, but that you're whole in a world that profits from your fracture. Your depression is not a chemical imbalance, but a soul imbalance. Your anxiety is not a disorder, but a reordering. The crisis you're avoiding is the birth canal to your becoming. But the clock is ticking. Every year of self-betrayal calcifies the persona's armor. Sooner or later, the cost of your disguise will exceed the terror of nakedness. The question is no longer why you abandoned yourself, but when you'll stop letting history live through you. The ancients called this metanoia, a radical turning of the soul. Not a tweak to your habits, but a revolution in your way of being. It begins when you stop asking what's wrong with me and start demanding when have I surrendered. You walk through life wearing invisible chains, each link forged by choices you don't remember making. The world feels solid, real, yet beneath its surface hums a silent machinery of delusion. Your thoughts are not entirely your own. Your desires? Borrowed. Even your suffering has been outsourced. This is the great irony of the human condition. You believe yourself to be awake, while sleepwalking through a script written by ghosts. Consider the Mandela effect, a phenomenon where masses misremember historical facts. But what if this collective false memory is merely a metaphor for a deeper distortion? Jung warned of the collective unconscious, an inherited psychic substrate shaping your perceptions, fears, and aspirations. You see the world not as it is, but as your culture's unresolved traumas demand you see it. Your political rage? Perhaps not your own, but the unmetabolized fury of generations. Your obsession with progress? The unhealed wound of ancestors who starved in winters. These forces don't just influence you, they inhabit you, whispering through the cracks of your logic. The consequences are both intimate and apocalyptic. On a personal level, you become a stranger to your own life. Neuroscientists confirm that the brain's default mode network, the circuitry responsible for self-referential thought, rewires itself around your persona. The more you perform a role, the more your biology conspires to make it you. Your authentic desires atrophy, replaced by cravings for validation, novelty, and the anesthetic of busyness. Cognitive biases like the sunk cost fallacy, I've suffered this long, so I must keep going, and confirmation bias, see? The world is as bleak as I feared, tighten the news. You don't choose, you rehearse. But the true horror lies in how these distortions scale. A society of self-estranged individuals becomes a civilization actively engineering its own demise. Consumerism isn't greed, it's displaced spiritual longing. You pillage forests, drain oceans, and wage wars not because you're evil, but because you've mistaken Earth's body for a mother who never loved you. Jung saw this clearly. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Substitute climate crisis for neurosis, and the diagnosis chills. Our collective insanity is a substitute for confronting the void within. Your relationships, too, are collateral damage. Love becomes transactional, a mutual agreement to admire each other's masks. You demand others play their roles flawlessly. The parent must be wise. The partner must complete you. The friend must mirror your values. When they falter, and they must, you feel betrayed. But it's not them you're furious with, it's the unconscious hope that they'd rescue you from your own existential labor. Sartre was ruthless here. Hell is other people. Not because others are cruel, but because they become mirrors reflecting back the parts of yourself you refuse to face. Even time bends to the distortion. You oscillate between nostalgia and dread, mourning a past you never fully lived and fearing a future you've already surrendered. The present, the only realm where transformation occurs, is reduced to a hyphen between regrets and fantasies. Psychologists call this temporal disintegration. The ancients called it being possessed by Chronos, the god of quantitative time, while ignoring Kairos, the god of the opportune moment. Your life becomes a countdown clock, not a living myth. But the most insidious consequence is the theft of your symbolic sight. Indigenous cultures perceive the world as a living dialogue, storms as ancestral warnings, dreams as divine missives, illness as unprocessed grief. Modernity reduced this to superstition, severing your lifeline to the symbolic. Yet Jung found that neglected symbols don't vanish, they erupt as pathologies. A man who ignores his dreams becomes a sleepwalker in waking life. A woman who silences her intuition births tumors as embodied metaphors. Your body isn't a machine, it's an oracle. But you've been taught to diagnose rather than decipher. The collective toll is staggering. Art becomes entertainment. Sex becomes release. Birth becomes a consumer choice. Death becomes a medical failure. The sacred is sterilized, stripped of its terror and majesty. Churches empty not because humans stopped believing, but because the symbols lost their blood. You've been left with a wasteland of literalism, where UFO sightings replace angelic visitations, and astrology apps replace communion with the cosmos. Huxley's nightmare of trivialized transcendence is here. We are having our religions taken away from us by the same people who took away our dances, the clever young men who know just the latest steps. Yet the ultimate consequence is one you feel in your bones but lack the language to name, the slow death of possibility. Every year, the walls of your identity thicken. Every compromise etches deeper grooves in your neural pathways. You grow fluent in the dialect of resignation, joking about adulting as if self-betrayal were inevitable. The poet Rilke warned, "Do not believe that he who seeks to comfort you lives untroubled among the simple, quiet words that sometimes do you good." His life has much difficulty and sadness. But you've traded difficulty for comfort, and in doing so, made sadness chronic. Worst of all, you've confused this narrowing for wisdom. That's just reality, you shrug, mistaking cultural hypnosis for cosmic law. But what if reality is not a cage, but a conversation? Quantum physics hints that observation shapes the observed. Indigenous wisdom insists the land dreams through those who walk it. Jung proposed that the psyche and the world are mirrored, that your inner chaos manifests as outer collapse. By tolerating your own fragmentation, you grant permission for the world to fragment. The clock is not just ticking, it's accelerating. With each generation, the collective shadow thickens. Mental illness skyrockets not because humans are weaker, but because the gulf between persona and soul has become unbridgeable. Children are born into a world where their first cry is quantified by APGAR scores, their wonder medicated as ADHD, their rage pathologized as disorders. They learn, before they can speak, that belonging requires amputation. You see their light dimming year by year and recognize it as your own. This is the unseen consequence of unseen forces. You've been drafted into a war against your own potential, mistaking the battlefield for home. But there's a fissure in the facade. In moments of crisis, a diagnosis, a loss, a sunset that cracks your heart open, you glimpse the truth. You were never meant to manage your life, but to risk it. The gods you've ignored are still listening. The dreams you've dismissed still hold maps. The acunum is the umbilical cord to your unlived life. The question is no longer what these forces have cost you, but what remains uncolonized within you. Where is the flicker that automation hasn't extinguished? Where is the rage that compliance hasn't pacified? Jung's red flag waves here. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The consequences are clear. The darkness is here. And it's time to speak its language. History's great liberators, mystics, artists, heretics, understood this. They did not fight the system head-on. They dissolved it by living as if they were already free. Consider the alchemists, Jung's symbolic ancestors. They spent lifetimes heating crucibles, not to turn lead into gold, but to transmute their own souls, to touch the prima materia, the raw essence beneath all illusions. Their laboratories were theaters of rebellion. Every flame they lit was a middle finger to a world that demanded superficiality. You are the alchemist now. Your first act of defiance? Stop trying to fix yourself and start forging yourself. But how? The answer is counterintuitive. You must weaponize your brokenness. Nietzsche proclaimed, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Your depression, your anxiety, your so-called flaws, these are not obstacles to your potential, but its raw materials. The Japanese art of kintsugi repairs shattered pottery with gold, honoring breaks as part of the object's history. Do the same with your psyche. That childhood humiliation? A fracture to gild. That failure that still haunts you? A fault line shimmering with latent power. Jungian analyst James Hillman argued that the cure for the wound is the wound itself. Stop fleeing your pain. Mine it for its secrets. Here's the radical shift. Authenticity is not a state to achieve, but a war to wage. You've been taught to find yourself through meditation retreats or personality tests. Jung suggests something more primal. Hunt yourself. Track your shadow through the underbrush of dreams, slips of the tongue, and the emotions you dismiss as irrational. When rage flares at a stranger's rudeness, don't suppress it, follow it. Whose voice really shouts there? Your father's? The church's? The 15th century peasant in your bloodline who starved while nobles feasted? Your shadow carries ancestral memories. To integrate it isn't to heal, but to reclaim your army of selves. This demands a brutal pragmatism. Begin with what Jung called active imagination, a dialogue with the unconscious. Sit with a blank page. Ask your anger, what do you protect? Let your sadness draw its self-portrait. These are not metaphors. Jung's patients cured paralysis by drawing mandalas, resolved suicidal urges by writing letters to their inner demons. The unconscious speaks in symbols because it knows you've been immunized against straightforward truth. Meet it on its own terrain. But be warned, this path is treasonous. To individuate is to betray every tribe that claims ownership of your soul. The corporate ladder will call you ungrateful. Your family will mourn the loss of the person they could manipulate. Even spiritual communities will shame your darkness as low vibration. Let them. As D.H. Lawrence wrote, the world fears a new experience more than it fears anything. Because a new experience displaces so many old experiences. Your liberation will feel like violence to those who profit from your captivity. History's rebels mapped this terrain. Van Gogh painted swirling skies not because he was mentally ill, but because he refused to see the world through consensus eyes. Frida Kahlo turned her broken body into a manifesto of unapologetic truth. Viktor Frankl, in Auschwitz, realized that even in hell, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. These weren't saints. They were defectors from the tyranny of the normal. Your rebellion will have practical demands. 1. Shatter the mirror of external validation. Keep a disobedience journal. For 1 week, document every time you alter your behavior to please others. Then, systematically rebel. Say no to invites that drain you. Voice the unpopular opinion. Wear the weird outfit. Each act starves the persona. 2. Court your shadow. When shame arises, don't numb it, interrogate it. If you fear being seen as selfish, choreograph a dance of radical self-care. If you dread arrogance, write a manifesto of your worth. Reclaim language weaponized against your wholeness. 3. Reclaim ritual. Modern life lacks rites of passage, so create your own. Spend a night alone in the woods. Burn letters to dead versions of yourself. Fast. Dance naked. Ritual creates a container for the unconscious to speak. 4. Seek holy doubt. Question not just beliefs, but how you believe. Why do you trust science but dismiss dreams? Why pray to gods but not your ancestors? Cultivate negative capability, the poet Keats' term for resting in mystery without reaching for certainty. This is not self-help. It's soul theft, stealing yourself back from cultural captors. You'll face resistance. The ego will stage mutinies, masquerading as practical concerns or imposter syndrome. The world will amp up its seductions, discounts on distractions, new drugs for your discontent. Stay dangerous. As Jung warned, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Your shadow isn't the enemy, it's the informant. The breakthrough comes when you realize you are not rebelling against the world, but for it. Each act of self-reclamation sends shockwaves through the collective unconscious. When Rosa Parks refused to move, she didn't just challenge segregation, she became a symbol of the human spirit's indomitability. Your personal revolution has the same stakes. Every time you honor your truth over tribal lies, you make it safer for others to do the same. This is how cultures shift, not through mass movements, but through millions of silent defections. The rebellion's final stage is the most paradoxical. You must surrender to win. Not to a god or guru, but to the self, Jung's term for the totality of your being. This isn't passive. It's the ultimate act of trust, like a trapeze artist releasing the bar midair. You'll need to abandon the lifeboat of your old identity before the new shore appears. But here's the secret the heroes and heretics knew: the void is not empty. It's pregnant with the self you're becoming. The masks are crumbling. The chains are rusted through. You've been given the coordinates, not to a destination, but to a frontier. Jung's words echo across the decades: who looks outside, dreams; who looks inside, awakes. The alarm is ringing. Will you hit snooze, or rise, finally, to meet your dawn? You are a paradox. A universe cloaked in skin. A god who forgot its name. The truth Jung spent his life unearthing is both devastating and liberating. You are not becoming, you are remembering. Every longing, every crisis, every flicker of doubt is not a sign of failure, but a homing beacon guiding you back to the self. Not the small self that pays taxes and scrolls screens, but the self that predates your birth and outlives your body. This is not mysticism. It is the bedrock of Jungian philosophy. Individuation is the art of surrendering to what you already are. Consider the myth of the Fisher King, ruler of a wasteland, wounded and waiting for a savior. When the knight Parsifal finally asks, "What ails you?" the king is healed, and the land blooms. Your entire life has been that unasked question. Your potential is not out there, it's in here, buried beneath layers of should and can't and someday. The wound you've been hiding, the shame, the grief, the primal hunger, is not your ruin. It's the throne where your power sits, waiting for you to kneel and claim it. Here is the ultimate rebellion: stop seeking. The moment you abandon the chase, the pursued becomes the pursuer. Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, reveals this truth: when you align with the self, reality conspires to meet you. Doors open not because you force them, but because you've become the key. The artist's inspiration, the leader's clarity, the lover's depth, These are not achievements. They are emanations of the whole self breathing through you. But to embody this, you must annihilate the final idol, the belief that wholeness requires effort. Trees do not strive to photosynthesize. Rivers do not labor to reach the sea. Your potential is not a mountain to climb but a current to surrender to. This is what the Zen masters call wu-wei, action through non-action. Not passivity, but harmony with the Tao, the Jungian self, the divine flow. Your role is not to create, but to get out of the way. The evidence surrounds you. Recall moments when time dissolved, creating art, making love, losing yourself in nature. In those instants, you weren't realizing potential, you were potential. The ego vanished, and the self danced. Jung called this participation mystique, the primal unity where observer and observed merge. Those glimpses weren't accidents. They were previews. The ultimate truth is this: you are the destination. Every therapy session, every heartbreak, every midnight epiphany was not a step towards something, but an excavation of what's always been there. Your potential isn't a future trophy, it's the air in your lungs, the light in your cells, the ancestral wisdom in your DNA. You are the hero and the quest, the wound and the cure. Now, the invitation, live as if you know this. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet alchemy of daily life. When fear says play small, laugh. When doubt says who are you to dream, answer, I am the dreamer and the dream. The world will test you. It will seduce you with shortcuts and shame you for audacity. Let it. You are no longer arguing for your limitations, you are building altars to your depths. Jung's final word on the matter cuts to the bone: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not achieve or find, become. A verb. A process. A perpetual unfolding. There is no finish line, only the sacred act of showing up, naked, unguarded, fiercely alive. The mirror still hangs where it always did. Look again. The stranger is gone. What remains is you, untamed, unshakable, and finally, impossibly, free. Every journey has an end, but this is only the beginning. If these words ignited something in you, a question, a rebellion, a shiver of recognition, then this is not our last conversation. Your like is not just a click, it's a signal in the dark. A ripple in the collective. A pact between those who refuse to sleepwalk. Subscribe to the channel. Not to follow me, but to meet you, the version of yourself already emerging, wild and whole. Here, you won't find prepackaged answers. You'll find mirrors. Bait for the soul. Maps to navigate the abysses Jung dared to explore. Your potential waits for no one's permission. Not even yours. But if you need an accomplice in this silent rebellion, I'm here. Ring the bell. The demons we'll face tomorrow are already at the gates. And remember, the world needs your light, not your compliance.